Chapter 1401. A single shockwave missile wasn't enough to truly harm him, but she could see that several more cannon barrels on that same warship had released beams of light. These beams of light cut off all avenues of evasion for him, and even more alarmingly, they exploded to form a massive net of light that converged toward him from all sides. These were capture missiles. They had been developed by the Federation for the purpose of capturing large sea soul beasts, and even 10,000-year-old soul beasts would find it very difficult to resist these missiles, let alone a human. She was currently still reeling from the effects of that shockwave missile, so there was no way for him to escape. He knew that he had still been too arrogant in the end. If he had been more cautious and traveled further away before contacting the Holy Spirit Douluo, this would have never happened. If he were to be captured by the Federal Fleet, then he really would be completely at their mercy. Only after truly facing a colossus like the Federal Fleet was he made to understand just how fearsome modern technology was. A series of mechas had already risen up into the air from the warship, and they were led by a black mecha. As soon as the capture missiles detained Shishi, the mechas would swoop in and take him back to the warship for interrogation. In this dire situation, Shishi displayed his prowess as one of Shrek's 7 monsters. He immediately bit down onto the tip of his own tongue, and soul power surged through his body as his 7th soul ring lit up, unleashing his space-time dragon true body. Shishi currently didn't possess a complete suit of 3-word battle armor. Among all of Shrek's 7 monsters, only Yuan and Yui, Yu Xinglan, and Tang Wuling possessed complete suits of 3-word battle armor, and the next in line to have their suits of battle armor completed was Xu Shaowen and Yue Sanyu. This arrangement had been made as Shishi and Xu Lizzie were the boyfriends of Yuan and Yui and Yu Xinglan, respectively. As such, Shishi currently only had 70% of his suit of 3-word battle armor. Thus, he didn't possess a domain and could only rely on his own martial soul true body. The space-time dragon had a very peculiar appearance. It resembled a cross between a dragon and a snake, and it had a pair of transparent wings on its back. Furthermore, it was far smaller than the average giant dragon, even in his martial soul true body form. Shishi's body had only extended to just over 3 meters in length. There was a layer of semi-transparent illusionary light shimmering all around the space-time dragon, and as soon as Shishi unleashed his martial soul true body, the negative effects of the shockwave missile were noticeably alleviated. Shishi's body swayed as he phased into space, instantly unleashing his spatial evasion ability to squirm out of the capture net. After that, he immediately tried to plunge into space to flee the scene, but he had underestimated the Federal Fleet's capabilities once again. 4 resounding booms rang out almost in complete unison, and 4 more shockwave missiles exploded around him, causing the space in the area to tremor violently. If he were to forcibly flee into space, he would most likely be torn apart by the resulting spatial rifts. Thus, Shishi was forced to re-emerge, and his skin crawled as he felt a burst of energy lock onto him. The goosebumps that had instinctively appeared all over his body told him that this attack was definitely one that posed a threat to his life. His body flashed through the air as he manifested 3 identical space-time dragon projections, all of which fled toward different directions at the same time. With ample preparation and the enhancements he had received from his martial soul true body, the impacts that the shockwave missiles had on him were negligible. Several dozens of streaks of light hurtled through the air, striking the 3 space-time dragons with unerring accuracy, but all of them merely faded away while Shishi reappeared elsewhere before attempting to flee into space again. Boom, boom, boom. Several more explosions rang out as more shockwave missiles were detonated, and Shishi was cursing internally. At least 5 mechas had already surrounded him, and the black mecha at the very forefront was unleashing a relentless barrage of energy attacks, all of which possessed extremely potent penetrative power. Shishi maneuvered himself through the air like an agile fish, and layers of illusionary projections appeared over his body, making it impossible for the opposition to ascertain exactly where he was. All of the surrounding mechas felt as if they were attacking something with no substantial body. No matter what type of attack they unleashed, their target was always able to evade them with ease. However, with the disruption from the shockwave missiles, he was unable to flee using his spatial abilities, either. He knew that the submarine was deep in the ocean, so there would be no way for him to request reinforcements by transmitting a signal back to it. As such, he could only rely on himself. But what could he do? He couldn't afford to be captured. Otherwise, it was very likely that his cover would be blown. He had to get away somehow. He was aware that regardless of how powerful his abilities were, there would be no way for him to escape if the fleet were to deploy a futile Douluo to detain him. As such, there was only a sliver of opportunity for him during this period of time in which the fleet wasn't regarding him as a serious threat. With that in mind, he gritted his teeth and on this occasion, he conjured up 6 illusionary projections of himself. The 6 space-time dragons instantly shot forth in different directions, leaving only 6 warped images in the air, while the bodies of the dragons were nowhere to be seen. This was a combination of his shadow dragon dagger's concealment ability and his space-time dragon's spatial powers. Even soul power detection soul tools wouldn't be able to ascertain his exact location. As long as one of the dragons could escape out of the range of the shockwave missiles, then he would succeed in his escape. However, right at this moment, the thing that Shishi had dreaded the most arrived. A string of resounding booms akin to rumbling thunderclaps rang out as at least 10 shockwave missiles exploded in midair, completely sealing off the entire area. Immediately thereafter, a cold voice rang out. "You think you can get away?" As the voice sounded within Shishi's ears, the surrounding temperature plummeted drastically, and the 6 space-time dragons all became very slow and sluggish, as if the air had suddenly congealed. Large snowflakes began to drift down from the heavens, and they all converged toward the 6 space-time dragons as if they had minds of their own. The snowflakes were very light and didn't possess any offensive power, but they were imbued with an extremely potent frosty aura. The sea was the world in which water elements thrived. As such, it couldn't be simpler to conjure up snowflakes here. Shishi immediately realized that an ice attribute control system titled Douluo had arrived, and he knew that he was in big trouble. The 6 space-time dragons instantly combined as one again to reduce the number of targets for the snowflakes, and as soon as his true body emerged, the countless snowflakes in the air immediately transformed into a massive vortex with him situated right at the center of it, making it impossible for him to escape. It was over. Never did Shishi think that a moment of complacency would result in such catastrophic consequences. A figure appeared in the midair not far away. This was a man in a crisp military uniform with his hands clasped behind his back. He appeared to be in his 40s, and there was a cold light in his eyes. He was the snow and ice battle god of the battle god hall's 18 battle gods. He was the master of snow and ice, and one of the 3 control system soul masters among the 18 battle gods. His forte lay in exerting control over large areas, and his ability struck all of his opponents with a sense of despair. Chapter 1402. He was especially proficient at dealing with agility system soul masters and had extremely sound judgment. This snow and ice storm that had been unleashed was his signature control ability, and it encompassed a very large area. The spy that they had detected was proving to be quite troublesome. He was adept in spatial abilities, and shockwave missiles weren't cheap. Over 20 of them had already been launched thus far, all to no avail, which was why he had decided to come out in person to get the job done. No matter how cunning the spy was, there was no way he would be able to escape. The snow and ice storm he had unleashed had the ability to seal off the space that it encompassed. But right at this moment, a stunning turn of events unfolded. All of a sudden, a burst of blue light abruptly rose up from the surface of the ocean. Shishi was already in complete despair, yet the frosty aura around him was suddenly alleviated significantly, and the snowflakes around him quickly melted away as if they were being subjected to the heat of the scorching summer sun. Yet in the sea, a familiar voice traveled into his ears, and his eyes lit up with elation as he immediately plunged into the sea like a cannonball. The snow and ice battle god faltered slightly upon seeing this before reflexively pointing a finger at Shishi, sending a streak of glacial light hurtling directly toward him. However, a massive wave suddenly rose up from the sea without any warning, then swept up Shishi's body and abruptly dragged him into the ocean. Thus, the snow and ice battle god's attack struck nothing but empty air. The snow and ice battle god was furious, and he immediately issued an instruction through his portable military communicator. Activate the deep sea radars. The underwater sonars, radars, thermal imaging devices, and soul power detection soul tools were all immediately activated, but no discoveries were made. It was as if the Shishi had been completely devoured by the ocean, leaving no traces behind. How was this possible? An astonished look appeared in the eyes of the snow and ice battle god upon receiving this report. He had faced countless agility system soul masters throughout his life, but it was the first time that something like this had ever happened. This was downright incredible. That wave clearly wasn't part of that agility system soul master's abilities, so someone had to have backed him up from underwater. Was this person from the Douluo Empire? In any case, the Federal Fleet was going to be discovered by the Douluo Empire eventually, but the later the discovery was made, the greater the advantage the Federal Fleet would gain. On top of that, the snow and ice battle god was feeling very indignant to have a spy sneak away from right under his nose. Come back. There's an unfathomably powerful being assisting that spy from the shadows. An authoritative voice rang out from within the communicator, and the fury on the snow and ice battle god's face immediately transitioned into a respectful expression upon hearing this voice. He immediately gave an affirmative reply, then flew toward the largest of the 3 aircraft carriers as opposed to returning to his own warship. An opening appeared in the light barrier around the aircraft carrier to grant him entry, and he flew directly to the control center. After arriving at the entrance to the control center, he stood up straight out outside the door, and yelled, "Sir, come in." A placid voice rang out in response. The snow and ice battle god strode into the control center, then extended an impeccable military salute toward the elderly man standing before him. "Apologies for my incompetence, Hall Master," the snow and ice battle god said with a hint of indignation in his eyes. Boundless Ocean Douluo Chenzinji waved a hand in response. "You're not to blame. That spy had an extremely powerful ally. I didn't think that there was a powerful being of this caliber in the Douluo Empire." "What do you mean, Hall Master?" The snow and ice battle god asked as his brows furrowed slightly. Chenzinji replied, "I was unable to sense who had rescued that spy. When I tried to track them down using my spiritual power, the sea rejected me. This is the first time I've encountered such a situation." "What?" The snow and ice battle god exclaimed in shock. Ever since he had joined the battle god hall, the Boundless Ocean Douluo had always been his idol, whom he harbored an unconditional sense of admiration toward. He was well aware of just how powerful the Boundless Ocean Douluo was. His martial soul was the ocean itself. He had an extremely high level of affinity with the ocean, and even though he hadn't reached the quasi-god level yet, he was only a sliver away. If a battle were to take place on the ocean, even a quasi-god won't necessarily be able to match him. With such a close connection to the sea, it was downright unthinkable that the ocean would reject him. How was this happening? It didn't make any sense. Chenzinji's brows furrowed slightly. "I don't know what happened, but this feeling is making me very uneasy. The sea only rejected me for an instant, but after that instant, both the spy and his ally completely disappeared. The sea produced natural water elemental fluctuations to throw off all of our detection devices for around 5 seconds, and by the time all of the detection devices returned to normal, both of them were gone." The snow and ice battle god asked, "What should we do, Hall Master?" A faint smile appeared on Chenzinji's face. "Let's wait and see what happens. I'm very curious about when such a powerful being appeared in the Douluo Empire. Their ability to draw upon the power of the sea is most likely not inferior to mine. At the very least, I can almost be completely certain that the Douluo Empire now has more than one limit Douluo. Isn't it much more interesting to be facing a more powerful opponent?" As the battle god Hall Master, his combat prowess hadn't waned in the slightest despite his advanced age, and as one of the leaders of the Eagle faction, he had always had a strong competitive spirit. "Issue my orders, travel full speed ahead toward our original planned destination. Now that we've already been discovered, there's no need to hide anything any longer." Yes, Shishi felt as if the entire world was spinning around him. In the instant that he was swept up by that massive wave, he had completely lost control over his own body, but there was a special type of power dragging him rapidly through the ocean. There was barely light this deep down in the ocean, so he had no idea where he was. Thankfully, his forte lay in his speed, so he was able to ward off the sense of dizziness that would often arise when traveling at such a high speed. Despite his lack of control over the situation, he felt very safe as the voice that had called out to him was one that he trusted the most and was most familiar with. Even if he misheard Yuan Yui's voice, there was no way that he would mishear this voice. Shishi had no idea how he had suddenly attained this power, but he had absolute trust in him. After all, it wasn't like this was the first time he had created a miracle. In reality, even Tang Wuling himself hadn't thought that he would be able to control the sea to such an extent. Furthermore, he had clearly sensed the spiritual power that belonged to the Boundless Ocean Douluo. As soon as that burst of spiritual power had entered the sea, it had almost stolen Tang Wuling's control over the ocean away from him, and it had also come very close to tracking him down. Thankfully, the sea had reacted of its own accord to cut off Chenzinji's spiritual sense, and also acted according to Tang Wuling's instruction to protect Shishi. Everything had happened so quickly that even Tang Wuling himself was still reeling from this dramatic sequence of events. Was that the power of the sea god that his father had left to him? Even though he wasn't the actual sea god, Tang Wuling had a feeling that the sea would protect him. Chapter 1403. As soon as this thought appeared in his mind, he was struck by a pang of guilt. The sea was trying to protect him, yet he was trying to set off an underwater explosion that would undoubtedly kill a large number of marine creatures. How could he be so selfish as to sacrifice the lives of marine creatures for the sake of minimizing human casualties in this war? As he was dragging Shishi back toward himself, he had already decided to abandon his original plan. He wasn't going to set off an underwater explosion, even if that meant that he wouldn't be able to delay the federal fleet. Right at this moment, he was struck by a peculiar feeling that seemed to be a rather indistinct spiritual connection. Tang Wuling could only sense indistinct yet boundless spiritual fluctuations converging toward him from all sides, transmitting some basic information to him. The information transmitted to him by the sea was very simple. All it required was an instruction from Tang Wuling, and it would do everything in its power to help him achieve what he wanted. Tang Wuling could clearly sense that after the ocean had felt his sea god aura, it had developed a strong sense of affection toward him, akin to the affection that a child felt toward a parent figure. Thus, there was even more reason for him to refrain from damaging the marine ecosystem. Just as he was struggling to come up with an alternative resolution, an image suddenly appeared in his mind, upon which his heart was immediately filled with elation. "Can you do that?" Tang Wuling asked with his mind. The answer he received from the ocean was an affirmative one, and Tang Wuling immediately conveyed his emotions of gratitude toward the sea in response. This was a massively pleasant surprise, but at the same time, it made him relearn the lesson that he should never resort to taking lives unless there was no other alternative. Prior to forging this connection with the sea, he had almost made a terrible mistake. A ball of faint blue light came flying rapidly toward him, and a faint smile appeared on his face at the sight of the figure within it. Thank heavens he had managed to recruit the assistance of the ocean. Otherwise, Shishi would have been in massive trouble. The world around Shishi finally stopped spinning, and he was immediately struck by an overwhelming sense of nausea, causing him to dry retch violently. Immediately thereafter, he caught sight of Tang Wuling, who was standing before him with faint blue light emanating from his body. He then looked around to find that he was still in the ocean, and that there was nothing around him aside from endless darkness. There was a blue light barrier around his and Tang Wuling's body that isolated them from the outside world, and Tang Wuling appraised him with a serious expression as he asked, "Do you not value your own life? Do you know what would have happened if you had been captured?" Shishi continued to dry retch as he replied, "Boss, I'm sorry, I won't ever get complacent again." Tang Wuling continued, "The overall power of the federal fleet will only be more formidable than what we can imagine. If the one who had appeared to detain you was the Boundless Ocean Douluo, you would have been captured in an instant. If that had happened, even I wouldn't have any way to save you." A hint of lingering fear also appeared in Shishi's eyes upon hearing this, but that was quickly replaced by a hint of befuddlement. "What is this place? We're currently situated on the seabed. Stay by my side for now," Tang Wuling replied. Shishi's eyes widened with astonishment. "We're on the seabed? How are we still able to speak to one another? And how did you get me down here in the first place?" Tang Wuling smiled and said, "Would you believe me if I told you that I'm the son of the sea god and am adored by the ocean?" Shishi immediately nodded without any hesitation. "I believe you. I'll believe whatever you tell me." Shishi was completely unable to disguise his own astonishment. How had Tang Wuling managed to do this? This was incredible. Tang Wuling said, "All right, stay quiet and don't stray away from me. The water pressure outside this light barrier is no joke. Elder Long passed down our academy's vast sea cosmic crystal to me, and it can allow me to draw upon the power of the ocean to a certain extent. Just to stay still for a while, I need some time to create some trouble for the federal fleet." An enlightened look appeared on Shishi's face upon hearing this. "So that's what it is. You're the sea god's pavilion master, so it's not wrong to call you the son of the sea god. Haha, you're the best, boss. If we had known that you could do this, we wouldn't even have had to use the submarine." A resigned look appeared on Tang Wuling's face at the sight of Shishi's frenetic display. "What do I need to do?" The sea transmitted its will to him in response. Slowly, he began to get a grasp on his current situation, as well as that of the ocean. The sea was the largest existence in nature, and it was its own entity. It had once also been under the jurisdiction of the planar ruler, but that changed when Tang San inherited the birth of the sea god. After becoming the sea god, Tang San naturally received the acknowledgement of the sea, and he had also done many things for the ocean. In a sense, the planar ruler was also a god, but in contrast with the ruler of the abyssal plane, the planar ruler of the Douluo star only possessed instinctive will and wasn't able to do anything specific. Thus, it was unable to control the actions of a god. After Tang San became a god, he continued to linger on the Douluo continent for quite a long time, and during that time the sea developed the deep-rooted notion that he was the true master of the sea, which led to the ocean developing a certain resistance toward the planar ruler. In reality, the loss of balance in the plane's ecosystem had a lot to do with the planar ruler's inability to control the ocean. Soul beasts were on the verge of extinction, yet sea soul beasts were still thriving. Tang San had once issued an order to the sea soul beasts to live as deep in the sea as they could, and on top of that, the sea soul beasts beasts were more unified, so they were able to better pass down their lineage while also largely avoiding being hunted by powerful beings. After losing control over the ocean, the life force energy that the planar ruler was able to draw upon decreased significantly, and that resulted in a series of problems. All of these problems were further compounded by the excessive consumption of resources by the human race through their rapid development, thereby resulting in this current situation. After tapping into the sea god aura that Tang San had left behind, Tang Wuling managed to receive the acknowledgement of the sea. On top of that, he was blessed by the plane, so in a sense, he had become a bridge between the sea and the rest of the plane. Never would the heartless Douluo have been able to anticipate that Tang Wuling, who had been chosen by both the planar ruler and the seed of life, would also be the son of the sea god. Normal people were naturally unable to sense this, but the planar ruler was certainly able to detect his bloodline. Even though Tang Wuling couldn't control the ocean like his father had been able to in the past, he was still able to control it to a certain extent and guide the ocean to do his bidding. If Tang San were here, he could conjure up a tsunami with just a single thought to capsize the entire federal fleet. No matter how powerful the federal fleet was, there was no way it could contend with the entire ocean. However, Tang Wuling didn't possess godly power, so he wasn't able to make the sea a part of himself. Thus, he could only control a part of the ocean to trigger some weather phenomena that would be still within the realm of normalcy. Even so, he was still the son of the sea god, and his control over the ocean certainly far exceeded that of all of the other soul masters. Even if the infernal King Douluo had pursued him here, it would be extremely difficult to kill Tang Wuling here in the ocean. After getting a grasp on the current situation, Tang Wuling knew what he had to do. The blue ball of light slowly rose upward and began to radiate gentle light. In contrast with Shishi, who was as good as blind in this environment, Tang Wuling could see countless marine creatures in a boundless underwater world. Chapter 1404. This was a truly wonderful feeling. He could sense that if he were to cultivate in the sea, he would benefit far more than from normal cultivation. Through his connection with the sea, he was also gaining a better grasp on the two powerful techniques that his father had bestowed upon him, particularly the second one, which was a spatial technique that emulated part of the ocean's power. Shishi could only sense that he was rising upward at a rapid speed, and this was quite a peculiar feeling. In particular, as the surface of the ocean drew closer and closer, the surrounding sea began to light up, presenting a sight that was more spectacular than any scenery. Boss, where's our submarine? Shishi asked. Tang Wuling replied, it's still waiting for us deep in the ocean. Let it wait there for now. I have another way to delay the federal fleet. What are you going to do? Shishi asked. Tang Wuling replied, just wait and see. I can't be sure that it's going to succeed, but there should be a good chance. At this point, the surrounding area had brightened significantly, and they were about to reach the surface of the ocean soon. Tang Wuling knew that the moment of truth was coming. Even as the son of the sea god, he wouldn't be able to trigger the change that he wanted to see if he didn't have enough physical tolerance. The duration of time that he would be able to affect the federal fleet would depend on how long he could persist. The sea parted, and a pillar of water carried Tang Wuling and Shishi to the surface. Blue light rippled, and it was as if Tang Wuling had sprouted out of the ocean. The conditions were currently very placid with blue skies stretching as far as the eyes could see. The two of them were currently situated around 30 nautical miles away from the federal fleet, which was already within the detection range of the fleet's radars. However, there was currently a light barrier formed by seawater around Tang Wuling and Shishi, and the barrier was very thin, but it was able to prevent them from being detected by the radars. This was the power of nature. Tang Wuling turned to Shishi and said, no matter what happens, stay quiet and don't stray away from me. You got it, Shishi said as he made a zipping motion over his own mouth before throwing away the figurative key. Tang Wuling smiled as he looked up into the sky and said, begin. He slowly raised his right hand to point up into the heavens, and the golden trident symbol on his forehead instantly began to release dazzling light. The sea around Tang Wuling began to churn violently. An enormous wave suddenly began to appear over the surface of the placid ocean. Shishi could clearly see that there were countless faint blue specks of light rising up into the air from these violent waves. Due to how diminutive these specks of light were, they were only visible to Tang Wuling and Shishi. The sea continued to churn with ferocious might, and extremely rich energy continued to rise up from the surface of the sea as the waves became more and more violent. The sea was a part of nature, so it had no will of its own and couldn't do anything by itself. Only its master would be able to guide it to complete some specific tasks. Tang Wuling couldn't control the sea, but he was able to influence the ocean to create some phenomena that could occur under normal circumstances, such as a storm. His right arm gradually turned into a dazzling blue color as he continued to point up into the heavens, and a golden projection began to appear. The projection was only around the same height as Tang Wuling, but it was covered from head to toe in a layer of golden radiance. It had a head of long blue hair and handsome facial features that bore a strong resemblance to Tang Wuling's appearance. The projection also had a golden trident pattern on its forehead, and its eyes seemed to be reflecting a vast starry sky. In that instant, dark clouds suddenly began to appear over the clear blue skies, and an indescribable sense of pressure was taking shape, sweeping up gusts of fierce winds and causing the turbulent waves to churn even more violently. The sun was gradually concealed behind a layer of dark clouds, and the sea began to roar as if it had just awakened from a long slumber. The boundless ocean Douluo suddenly opened his eyes as he sat on his chair in the control center. A faint layer of light flashed around him, and in the next instant, he arrived in the air above the aircraft carrier. He cast his gaze into the distance, and from his position, he could see the ferocious waves on the surface of the ocean, as well as the rich water elements rapidly rising up into the air. Someone's using the power of the ocean. Could it be the same person as the one from before? Chen Zinji's brows furrowed tightly in a grim manner. If it really were the same person, what exactly did he want to do, and what could he even achieve? The sky grew darker and darker, and lightning began to flash within the dense blanket of dark clouds up above. The boundless ocean Douluo's heart jolted with shock as he took in the current situation. As a limit Douluo who was a descendant of the ancient sea Douluo, he had a very high level of affinity with the ocean. However, at this moment, he could sense that the sea was roaring at him in fury, and he was struggling to even control the seawater around the aircraft carrier. Why was this type of power capable of doing this? Attention, all units. Prepare to connect all ships and keep your communicators switched on to await my instructions. Chen Zinji commanded. At the same time, he had already begun to fly toward the epicenter where he could sense that the eruption of energy was originating from. He wanted to see exactly who it was that was causing such a commotion and had even turned the ocean against him. The weather out at sea was indeed very unpredictable, but such an abrupt and drastic turn in weather conditions was still extremely rare. On top of that, for the very first time in his life, he could sense that the power of the ocean was rejecting him. This was completely abnormal. What had happened to make the ocean become like this? This was definitely not a natural occurrence. There was either an extremely powerful soul master behind this, or an almighty sea soul beast. If it were a sea soul beast, then it had to at least be a great beast for it to be able to make the sea reject a demigod like him. If it were a human, then they had to be from the Douluo Empire. Regardless of what it was, the situation was definitely not within the realm of their expectations. All of a sudden, a rumbling thunderclap rang out to break the tense and oppressive silence that had settled over the sea. Bolts of lightning quickly began to flash and intertwine to form massive lightning nets, before crashing down from above. The thunderclaps made it sound as if heaven and earth were roaring to vent its fury, and extremely rich lightning and water elements were gathering within a vast surrounding area. Tang Wuling looked up into the sky, and all of a sudden, an urgent voice rang out in his heart. A faint smile appeared on his face upon hearing this voice, and he flapped his golden dragon king wings, propelling himself straight up into the heavens. Shishi naturally rose up alongside him, and both of them headed directly toward the lightning clouds up above. Chapter 1405. Boss, have you gone insane? Shishi was on the verge of soiling himself at the sight of the ferocious bolts of lightning in the sky. Due to the excessive density of lightning within the dark clouds, they were forming balls of lightning that were intertwining in midair. Just by looking at the scene unfolding up above, one could sense the devastating destructive power that was brewing. Be quiet. If you're scared, then close your eyes, Tang Wuling said. He was flying at an extremely fast speed, and in what seemed like the blink of an eye, he had already plunged into the vast expanse of lightning up above. It's over. Shishi reflexively closed his eyes and waited for himself to be charred to a cinder crisp, but much to his surprise, he wasn't struck by any discomfort at all. What was happening? He opened his eyes again to find himself in a bluish-purple world that was so spectacular that he was momentarily entranced. He discovered that a purple ball of light had appeared around himself and Tang Wuling, and it was as if they were situated in a purple crystal. Outside the purple crystal, waves of lightning were crashing down toward them, but not only was the lightning not able to harm the crystal in the slightest, it was being absorbed. He then turned to Tang Wuling to find that he had taken a seat with his legs crossed in midair. His golden dragon king wings were spread open, and there was a hint of elation on his calm face. 8 soul rings, consisting of 4 blacks, 1 greenish golden, and 3 orange golden, were revolving around him, and the golden trident symbol on his forehead had become particularly bright. What was he doing? She looked on in a flabbergasted manner. Finally, he discovered that something was amiss. Upon closer inspection, he realized that the purple ball of light around them was woven from a series of vines. It was just that the vines were being completely illuminated by the lightning strikes, thereby giving it the appearance of a single unbroken crystal. Was this the infernal lightning vine? She was astonished as this answer occurred to him. What was Tang Wuling doing? Could it be that he was absorbing his ninth soul ring? Indeed, that was exactly what Tang Wuling was doing. The infernal lightning vine had been struck by a sense of elation upon sensing the lightning storm that Tang Wuling had summoned above the ocean, and it immediately urged him to fly into the lightning clouds so it could absorb the enormous energy within the bolts of lightning. Ever since the infernal lightning vine had become Zhang Yang's soul spirit, it had constantly been repressed and prohibited from further absorbing lightning in order to prevent self-detonation. However, absorbing lightning was an integral part of the infernal lightning vine's being, so at this moment, it was like a ferocious beast that had starved for countless years and had suddenly caught sight of a delicious feast. How could it possibly be able to hold back? It had betrayed Zhang Yang as he had repressed its instincts for all these years, and never fulfilled his promise. Over time, it had developed nothing but resentment toward its former host. In contrast, it had only been with Tang Wuling for a very short time, but with the assistance and nourishment it had received from the beautiful silk tulip and Tang Wuling's powers as the son of nature, not only had it made a full recovery, many of its inherent flaws had also been ironed out. It was now able to devour lightning to its heart's content without any inhibitions, precisely because it was being protected by Tang Wuling. With the nourishment from his son of nature aura, it didn't have to worry about self-detonation at all. On top of that, its host wasn't just the son of nature, he was also the son of the sea god. Here in the ocean, the power of the son of the sea god naturally far outstripped that of the son of nature. The rich water elements acted as the ideal source of protection for the infernal lightning vine, thereby allowing it to wholeheartedly devour the lightning elements in the air with reckless abandon. It was driven by its instincts to devour lightning elements, even though doing so would eventually lead to its demise, and nothing was more pleasurable for it than to be able to absorb lightning like this. In the instant that Tang Wuling had released and allowed it to freely devour lightning while protecting it using his control over the surrounding water elements, it had already been completely won over by him. The infernal lightning vine absorbed the enormous wealth of lightning elements in the air in an unreserved manner to enhance itself, and it could clearly sense itself becoming more powerful with each passing lightning strike. A new infernal lightning vine had virtually the slowest rate of cultivation among all soul beasts, but after reaching 10,000 years of age, its rate of cultivation would become the fastest among all soul beasts. Unfortunately, this rapid spike in the rate of its cultivation also heralded the beginning of the end. Every time it cultivated after reaching 10,000 years of age, it ran the risk of destroying itself. It was the most destructive plant system soul beast, but also one that was destined for tragedy. It could be said that this infernal lightning vine was the luckiest one to ever exist, as it had found a host who was blessed by the plane of ruler, and was also the son of a god. It was now able to devour lightning without any fear of consequences. If it were capable of crying, there would be tears of gratitude and elation streaming down its face. It was rejoicing over its own decision. If it hadn't listened to the beautiful silk tulip and chosen to stay with Zhang Yang, then it would never have been able to experience this joy ever again. The lightning being absorbed by the infernal lightning vine wasn't affecting the dark clouds at all. The blanket of dark clouds seemed to be descending toward the sea, and the entire ocean began to churn violently as ferocious winds were swept up in a frenzy. What was even more terrifying was that up until this point, not even a single drop of rain had fallen. All people who were well versed with the sea knew that the longer a storm took to brew, the more fearsome it would be. However, this also gave the Federal fleet ample time to prepare to weather the storm. The three fleets quickly converged, and a series of giant metal pillars extended outward to connect all of the ships before drawing them into a dense cluster. From a distance, it appeared as if a continent with an extremely rugged terrain had appeared on the surface of the ocean. All of the ships of the three fleets were connected together with the three aircraft carriers at the very center, and they were all arranged in a formation that had been meticulously calculated to be able to withstand the elements to the greatest extent. This was the special setup that the Federal fleet had prepared specifically to counter dangerous weather conditions. The Soul Fighter aircrafts on the decks of the aircraft carriers had already been stored away into their designated cabins and secured so that they wouldn't be damaged in the imminent storm. Chen Zhenji was still hovering above the ocean, sensing the changes taking place in the surrounding water elements. He could sense that the water elements seemed to have attained life of their own and were constantly rising up into the air. What was even more terrifying was that an infernal realm of lightning had appeared up above, and with his enormous powers, he couldn't help but feel a sense of fear. Under normal circumstances, he wouldn't have to fear any storm as he could easily erase the storm with his affinity with the ocean. However, this was a completely unprecedented situation in which he seemed to have lost the blessings of the sea. There was no way for him to control the storm, and he couldn't disrupt the terrifying lightning that had gathered up above. The more he looked at the situation, the more he was struck by the feeling that this wasn't a man-made situation. He couldn't imagine any human who was capable of summoning such a fearsome storm and influencing the ocean to this extent. This was completely beyond human capabilities, even for Limit Douluo. He was already the Limit Douluo with the greatest level of affinity with the sea, yet he knew that he wouldn't be able to accomplish something like this. Could it be that there was a pack of great beasts lurking nearby? There had to be at least two great beasts that were the equivalent of Limit Douluo that were creating such a fearsome storm. Thankfully, human technology had already advanced to the extent that the power of soul beasts was simply no match, so he didn't have to be concerned about anything. No matter how fierce this storm was, there was no way that it would be able to break the interconnected fleet. As for those two hypothetical great beasts, if they dared to appear, then he would show them the power of his four-way battle armor. Chapter 1406. Another rumbling thunderclap rang out, and the entire sky was instantly illuminated into a dark purple color. All of a sudden, a pillar of water suddenly rose up into the air, instantly plunging into the dark clouds up above to connect the ocean and the dark clouds. Chen Zhenji was greatly alarmed to see this. This was a cyclone that was brewing over the ocean, otherwise known as a waterspout. They were extremely rare, but possessed extremely potent destructive power of both wind and water. Even more damning was the psychological impact of witnessing such a devastating natural phenomenon. Immediately thereafter, another waterspout appeared, followed by another, then one more, and in what seemed like the blink of an eye, at least several dozens of waterspouts had appeared around the fleet. The entire ocean had been stirred up into a violent frenzy, and waves were rising to over 100 meters tall, as if they were being drawn upward by the heavens. The entire fleet was being tossed around violently, but thankfully, all of the ships were interconnected to form a massive structure that managed to maintain temporary stability even in the face of such fearsome conditions. Chen Zhenji's expression had already darkened significantly at this point, and he was issuing one order after another. Human technology was able to destroy the power of nature, but not control it, and the ocean was undoubtedly the most enormous source of power in nature. So all they could do was adopt a passive stance and weather the storm. At the same time, they had to search for the instigator behind these weather phenomena. No matter who it was, they had to have an objective. Were they trying to defeat the entire Federal fleet through these weather phenomena alone? That was clearly impossible. All of the waterspouts began to converge in a doomsday-like scenario, sweeping up colossal waves that were hundreds of meters tall, all of which crashed viciously against the interconnected fleets. Many of the smaller ships were completely submerged underwater before resurfacing thanks to their connections with the larger ships. As the waterspouts wreaked havoc on the surrounding ocean, all of the members of the fleet could only stay in their cabins and hold on to something firm to steady themselves. Thankfully, all of the cabins had a waterproofing function. Otherwise, they would have been entirely waterlogged by the massive waves already. This was the power of nature. Chen Zhenji continued to hover in midair, and neither the seawater nor the lightning was able to get close to him. In the face of the ferocious waterspouts and gargantuan waves, the interconnected fleets were being thrown around like a small raft, tumbling up and down without any semblance of control. However, Chen Zhenji could sense that the giant waves were taking the fleet rapidly toward a certain direction. Under such extraordinary conditions, none of the radars were going to be able to function, so they could only recalibrate and calculate their location after the storm passed. Even though all of the members of the fleets had spent most of their lives out at sea, they had never encountered such a devastating situation, and many of them were beginning to develop symptoms of seasickness. The only thing that was saving the three fleets from being completely capsized was their interconnection system. Otherwise, they would all be in severe trouble, particularly the smaller ships among the fleets. Generally speaking, a storm would normally abate as quickly as it arrived, but this storm was displaying displaying no signs of subsiding. Instead, it was only becoming more and more ferocious. The violent tumbling of the ships was extremely taxing on the energy reserves of the members of the fleet, yet they had to maintain a high level of concentration so they didn't miss any orders from Chenzenji. The entire federal fleet was in a state of complete chaos. The rain was pelting down from the heavens in waves rather than droplets, and the rainwater was extremely rank and salty, clearly an indication that this was the seawater that was falling after being drawn up into the sky. The enormous volume of water crashing down from the heavens had reduced visibility to close to zero, and even Chenzenji was forced to return to his aircraft carrier. In the control center, Chenzenji sat in his chair without a single drop of rain on his body, but he wore an expression of thunderous fury. A major general advisor, who was also a member of the Battle God Hall, approached him and asked, "Hall Master, what should we do now?" Even though the control center was also swaying violently, he stood firmly on the ground as if he had been nailed into the floor. "We wait," Chenzenji replied. Regardless of who it was that had instigated this storm, there was no way that they could keep this up for long. Weathering the storm was indeed going to be quite exhausting for the members of the federal fleet, but they weren't actually in any substantial danger. Unless the sky were to literally fall down onto the fleet, the interconnection system would allow it to weather any storm. The advisor gave an affirmative response before falling silent, while Chenzenji pondered the situation with tightly furrowed brows. It was clear that their voyage to the Douluo Empire would have to be delayed. Following such a devastating storm, the members of the fleet needed time to rest and recuperate, and the ships also had to be examined for damage. Without any leads to investigate, all they could do was wait. Even with his immense individual powers, there was nothing he could do in this situation. In the Douluo Empire, what? Dai Tianling shuddered as he immediately rose to his feet. The sight of the Holy Spirit Douluo had struck him with a momentary sense of entrancement. She was so beautiful and pristine. She was like an angel who had descended from the heavens. He was well aware of the fact that she was a limit Douluo who was over 100 years old, but he still couldn't help but be enraptured by her beauty. However, when he heard what the Holy Spirit Douluo had to say, he had been stunned to the point of springing right out of his throne. Even though they knew that the federal military would be deployed soon and they had constantly been making preparations, they didn't think that the war would arrive this quickly. The enemy was already mere days away from them, but they were completely oblivious. According to the Holy Spirit Douluo, the united federal fleet would arrive at the Douluo Empire in 3 days at most. The Douluo Empire was roughly aware of just how powerful the three fleets were, and even though the Douluo Empire was also quite powerful in itself, he knew that they were still no match for the prowess of the federal fleet. The enemy had suddenly arrived, yet they still weren't prepared. This was a massive issue. If they couldn't take the correct measures here, then the entire empire could fall in a very short time. Dai Tianling took a deep breath to repress the overwhelming sense of horror in his heart, and he immediately turned to the servant beside him. "Issue an order for all of the officials of the empire to gather for a conference right away. We need to address this situation immediately. We've already begun to set up the weapons given to us by the Tang sect, but there's no way we'll be able to set everything up in 3 days. The delivery and installation processes all require time. Holy Spirit Douluo, does Sect Master Tang have any ideas? Would you be able to stay here to assist us?" Dai Tianling was truly beginning to panic, and he had completely forgotten the matter about Tang Wulin and his own daughter. Nothing was more important now than saving the empire. Yali shook her head with her brows furrowed slightly. "My apologies, Your Majesty, but I must get back to them right away. Wulin told me to tell you that he's going to do his best to delay the arrival of the federal fleet. As for how long he'll be able to delay them for, that's really hard to say. I have to go back and help him. The only thing you can do now is to make preparations as quickly as possible, and also contact the Dou Sphere Empire so they can make preparations as well." Chapter 1407. Dai Tianling's brows furrowed tightly upon hearing this. Yali's refusal to stay had left a very sour taste in his mouth. Even with this limit Douluo among their ranks, there was no way that Tang Wulin and the others would be able to stall the federal fleet for any meaningful amount of time. As such, in his eyes, Yali was simply using this excuse to get away from the Douluo Empire, which was about to be ravaged by war soon. However, he made no outward display of his displeasure. After all, if Yali hadn't come back all this way to deliver this message to them, he would still be completely oblivious to the massive threat that was looming on the horizon. "All right, then I wish you all the best, and please pass on my regards to Sect Master Tang. If we can survive this ordeal, I'll be sure to pay Sect Master Tang a visit in person to deliver a formal apology. If there were any medicine in this world that could remedy remorse, then he'd down an entire bottle right away. If he hadn't decided to organize that trial of 5 gods in a moment of hot-headed idiocy, the agreement with the Tang sect would have been established much earlier, and they would have set everything up by now. It was exactly because of his inability to swallow his own pride that the entire empire had now been plunged into such a perilous situation. However, remorse wasn't going to do any good in this situation. He had to think of a way to address this dire situation. Right at this moment, a servant suddenly rushed into the room. "I have a report to make." "What is it?" Dai Tianling hurriedly asked. "Your Majesty, the meteorology department just delivered an emergency report, stating that a storm of a magnitude and intensity that hasn't been seen for over 100 years has suddenly appeared over the western sea. The storm is visible even from the western coast, but instead of approaching the mainland, it seems to be gradually moving further away. The meteorology department has only delivered this report due to the ferocity of the storm and the abruptness of its emergence." "The western sea?" Dai Tianling and Yali exclaimed in unison. The federal fleet was coming from the western sea. Both of them exchanged a glance, and they each could see their own astonishment mirrored in one another's eyes. What did such a fearsome storm entail? It entailed that the federal fleet was most likely going to be affected by the storm, thereby buying the Douluo Empire some more time. Dai Tianling's expression immediately changed drastically as this thought occurred to him. Just a moment ago, he had been under the impression that Yali was merely using this as an alibi to get away, but his mind had been completely changed. He had arrived at the conclusion that there had to be an extremely powerful being capable of controlling the weather among the Tang sect entourage, and that person was stalling the federal fleet for their sake. "You have my thanks, Holy Spirit Douluo." He immediately extended a deep bow toward Yali. Regardless of whether the Tang sect was behind this, he had to do this. If the Tang sect really were responsible for this, then his gratitude was warranted. Even if that weren't the case, he didn't lose anything by doing this, and it would improve the impression that Yali had of him. "Now's not the time to be thanking me, Your Majesty. I'd advise you to begin making preparations right away. I'll be taking my leave now." Yali flew out of the palace as a streak of white light as soon as her voice trailed off. Unlike Dai Tianling, she was well aware that there was no one in the Tang sect entourage capable of conjuring up such a fierce storm. There seemed to be no end in sight to the violent storm, and high up in the sky, the purple light around Tang Wulin and Shishi had been completely turned into a purplish golden color. Even Shishi could clearly sense the terrifying aura emanating from this purplish golden light. A series of blue silver emperor vine had already risen up from Tang Wulin's body and intertwined with this purplish golden light. The purplish golden color began to spread over the blue silver emperor vines, while the blue silver emperor vines were releasing bluish golden light that was being injected into the infernal lightning vine's body to stabilize it. Through its constant engulfment of lightning, the infernal lightning vine had already reached a state of saturation, but even so, it was still devouring lightning like there was no tomorrow. This was the nature of the infernal lightning vine. It would continue to devour so long as there was still more lightning for it to devour. At this moment, Tang Wulin's entire body was completely numb. The lightning power that was purified by the infernal lightning vine was simply far too fearsome. It was unadulterated destructive power without any impurities. He was currently using this power to cleanse his own body of all minor impurities, and also using this experience to consolidate the powers he had attained through this recent period of rapid improvement. Essentially, he was using lightning to refine his own body. If he didn't have the body sex congenital secret method to support himself, he wouldn't dare to do this. Even at Shishi's level of power, guiding such pure lightning power directly into his body would immediately reduce him to dust. Under the stimulus of the electric currents, a purplish golden color began to appear in his body as the congenital secret method gradually combined with the lightning. The most prominent attribute of the body sex congenital secret method was that it completely stimulated one's latent potential to trigger evolution and take one beyond human limits. The body sect was once considered to be one of the most powerful sects on the entire continent, as almost all of its forefathers who had successfully cultivated the congenital secret method had become limit Douluos. At the same time, they also possessed the most stamina when it came to combat. The congenital secret method allowed a soul master to withstand far more impact than their cultivation rank would otherwise allow, and through the refinement Tang Wulin was receiving from this pure lightning power, the negative after effects brought on by his sudden breakthrough to become a titled Douluo would gradually be ironed out. On top of that, his powers were rapidly being consolidated, and he had also begun to fuse with the infernal lightning vine to make it his fourth soul spirit. Even though the infernal lightning vine had become extremely violent after devouring devouring so much lightning, it wasn't resisting Tang Wuling at all. There was no one more suitable for it than Tang Wuling, and it was already in a soul spirit state, so it would immediately die if it were to leave Tang Wuling's body. On top of that, following Tang Wuling gave it a chance to ascend to a higher level. Tang Wuling, son of nature aura, was able to iron out its biggest inherent flaw, and Tang Wuling's blue silver emperor was a top-tier martial soul in the plant world, so it was an exceptional match for the infernal lightning vine. The blue silver emperor could bestow upon the infernal lightning vine resilience, while the infernal lightning vine could bestow upon the blue silver emperor violent explosive power. Under the influence of Tang Wuling's golden dragon king bloodline, the infernal lightning vine was rapidly evolving amid the violent lightning storm. Throughout this entire process, the storm had shown no signs of subsiding at all. Shishi was standing on the spot, not even daring to move a single inch as he appraised Tang Wuling in silence. He could sense the terrifying power imbued within the purplish golden light, so he didn't dare to touch it. Even the slightest physical contact could instantly reduce him to dust. In his eyes, Tang Wuling had become so far out of reach that he couldn't even muster up the urge to try and catch up to him anymore. It was downright unimaginable that a human being could bathe in this terrifying realm of lightning. Surely even a limit Douluo wouldn't be able to accomplish this. Was the vast sea cosmic crystal alone really enough to allow him to do this? If the vast sea cosmic crystal possessed this much power, why hadn't the Atlas Douluo used it against the Godslayer missile? Perhaps it could only display its power in the sea? All types of thoughts were flashing through Shishi's mind, and a hint of awe and veneration had crept into his eyes. After Tang Wuling became the Tang Sect Master and Sea God's Pavilion Master, he had constantly been evolving and also becoming more intelligent and authoritative. Chapter 1408. In particular, the trial of 5 gods had triggered an evolution within him, transforming him into a truly worthy Tang Sect Master. Back when Tang Wuling had first become the Tang Sect Master, no one had paid much heed to him, and everyone thought that he was only being nurtured as a stand-in Sect Master. They had thought that the heartless Douluo and amorous Douluo were still the ones who were truly in power, and that it would take a long time before Tang Wuling could truly become the Sect Master. However, less than a year had passed since then, and Tang Wuling had already shown himself to be more than capable of holding his own. How could his friends not be in awe and admiration of him? Even Shishi himself hadn't noticed that he had gradually lost hope in competing with Tang Wuling, and was now simply proud of being one of Tang Wuling's closest companions. Following this trip to the 2 neighboring continents, Shrek's 7 monsters had truly begun to mature. During their first battle against the monster 8 kings, there had been a significant gap between them. If Tang Wuling and Gu Yue hadn't suddenly unleashed their divine dragon transformation at the end, they would have had no chance at all. However, during what was supposed to be the revenge battle for the monster 8 kings, Shrek's 6 monsters had crushed their opponents with ease. The tables had been completely turned, and they hadn't even used their full power during that battle. Yuan and Yui alone had been enough to hold off their 2 most powerful opponents, and she still had more to spare. All of them were prodigies, but their different experiences had caused their paths to diverge, and it was undoubtedly the case that Shrek's 7 monsters were going to be able to go further. With that in mind, Shishi focused his attention on Tang Wuling again, wondering to himself just how powerful Tang Wuling as a titled Douluo would be once he fused with his 4th soul spirit. He had already been able to contend with Hyper Douluo at the Soul Douluo level. What was he going to be capable of as a titled Douluo? With his ultra-powerful suit of 3-word battle armor, he would most likely be able to ensure self-preservation even against a limit Douluo. The lightning, wind, and rain showed no signs of subsiding, and even after becoming interconnected, the 3 fleets were still being tossed around in the turbulent waves. All of their communication and sensory devices had been rendered completely ineffective, which meant that they were essentially temporarily completely lost and blind. Chen Xinji's expression darkened further and further. The longer this storm persisted, the likelier it was that it was a man-made storm. However, if this really were a man-made storm, then just how fearsome was their opponent? Even if the sea hadn't suddenly turned on him, there was still no way that he could possibly conjure up such a ferocious storm. 6 hours had already passed since the commencement of the storm, and all of the members of the Federal Fleet were completely exhausted. The interconnection system had allowed them to avoid casualties thus far, but in the midst of such horrible weather conditions, the energy and stamina of the members of the fleet were being forced to undergo a stern test. Some of the soul tools on the ships were already being damaged by the storm, and he had already received over 20 emergency reports. Perhaps this was a super soul tool that could disrupt the weather. This thought had occurred to Chen Xinji before, but if it were true, then that would be even more terrifying. If the Douluo Empire had developed such a fearsome piece of technology, then the Federation may not be able to win this war. In any case, all they could do now was wait. Even with his powers, he didn't dare to rise up into the clouds to inspect the conditions within the realm of lightning up above. There was simply no way that a single man could contend with the full fury of nature. Boom. All of a sudden, an unprecedentedly deafening boom rang out, and the entire world outside the control center seemed to have suddenly changed color. A purplish golden color had appeared in the air, and it was quickly assimilating all of the lightning in the air, turning them into the same color. A ball of lightning descended from above like a massive raindrop, and in the next instant, it had already crashed down upon the ocean. The seawater in a radius of over a kilometer was instantly turned into a purplish golden color, and a string of violent thunderclaps rang out in rapid succession. All ships, activate your protective barriers to full capacity. Chen Xinji immediately yelled into the internal communication device. He didn't know what this purplish golden lightning was, but his instincts told him that it was not something they could afford to mess with. More purplish golden balls of lightning began to fall from the heavens like rain, descending toward the ocean, as well as upon the 3 fleets. Even Tang Wuling himself was unaware of what was currently happening as he had reached a critical juncture in his meditation. The surrounding purplish golden lightning had illuminated him into a purplish golden color, and his entire body had almost become transparent. The infernal lightning vine was growing in a frenzy, and it had already completely fused as one with the blue silver emperor, but it was still devouring lightning with reckless abandon. It had never felt so alive and free of inhibitions. Ever since it had attained sentience, it had always craved more lightning, even if devouring lightning would eventually lead it to destruction. However, it had never encountered such a violent lightning storm that had persisted for such a long time. Ever since it had become Zhang Yang's soul spirit, it had been forced to essentially starve and deny its greatest instinctive desire, and after being starved for long, its greed had been exacerbated to an unprecedented level. Every single vine had elongated to several hundred meters in length, and they were swaying wildly through the air. The inside of the vine was the blue silver emperor, but on the outside was what appeared to be a purplish golden suit of lightning armor that was radiating dazzling light. With each passing second, large quantities of lightning were flowing into the infernal lightning vine, causing it to constantly evolve. Whenever it reached the brink of self-detonation, a burst of neutralizing power would surge forth to nullify the destructive power, thereby allowing it to devour more lightning. This was a euphoric feeling, and the infernal lightning vine had completely lost itself, and also accepted Tang Wuling with all its heart. Even if it were to be destroyed, experiencing such bliss and exhilaration was well worth the consequences. However, Tang Wuling was already struggling to keep up. Even with his insane physical constitution, his body was beginning to break down within this realm of lightning. It was no longer just his power as the son of nature that was bolstering the infernal lightning vine. It was his power as the son of the sea god as well. Through his control over the sea, he was able to draw upon the rich water elements in the environment to protect the infernal lightning vine and allow it to last this long. However, Tang Wuling's body was already filled to the brim with lightning power, and the terrifying destructive power was beginning to repress even his son of nature aura. Lightning elements were the most volatile of all elements, and his son of nature aura had already been debilitated to begin with here in the sea. No matter how much the realm wished to protect him, there was a limit. What could he do? If things were to continue like this, both he and the infernal lightning vine would be led to destruction. Right at this moment, Tang Wuling's forehead suddenly lit up. A burst of dazzling golden light abruptly erupted out of the heavy purplish golden light, and it emerged out of his glabella before hovering in front of him. Shishi's eyes immediately widened upon seeing this. It was a trident that was around 4 meters in length, and the golden light shimmering over the trident was rippling like water. In the instant that it emerged, the surrounding lightning was suddenly silenced for a moment. In contrast, the sea down below began to churn in a frenzy, and a string of countless sobs rang out. Below the central prong of the trident was a fist-sized rhomboid blue gemstone that was giving off a gentle light. My son, I am only able to save your life on 3 occasions, and at the same time, there'll also be 3 opportunities for you to experience unpredictable storm. So make the most of this opportunity. A familiar, warm, and compassionate voice rang out within Tang Wuling's heart, and he reflexively opened his eyes. Only he could see that there was currently an almighty figure standing beside the golden trident, resembling a pillar between heaven and earth. The man was clad in a suit of gold armor, and his long hair was as blue as the sea. His eyes seemed to contain the entire universe, and he had one hand closed around the long shaft of the trident. Chapter 1409. Father, Tang Wuling wanted to yell out, but he was unable to do anything in his current state. Tang San turned to him with the benevolent and compassionate smile of a father, then gently waved his golden trident through the air in a beautiful arc as if it were as light as a feather. Golden halos proliferated outward one after another, layer upon layer, and as soon as they appeared, everything in the surrounding area became silent. The lightning subsided, and the sea also became peaceful again. The golden halos easily encompassed all of the surrounding purplish golden lightning, and it was as if they contained a small world within them. The surrounding space began to fluctuate violently as if it was struggling for its life, but during its struggles, it naturally formed a mystical type of resonance with the golden halos. The violent purplish golden lightning conformed to the order within this small world, and it began to inject itself into the infernal lightning vine in wisps and strands. What was even more remarkable to Tang Wuling was that he had lost that overinflated sense of being filled by excessive violent energy. A series of golden halos had appeared around the infernal lightning vine, and he could clearly sense that there was enormous lightning power imbued within the halos, but none of it was able to come out. This was a spatial seal, similar to the golden dragon king seals within his body. The control over spatial power could only be described as perfect, and in that instant, Tang Wuling felt as if his mind had been struck by a bolt of lightning, and he began to attain an unprecedented understanding of the paramount laws of heaven and earth. The surrounding lightning disappeared within the golden halos, as did the mighty golden figure. My son, wait for my return. After the golden figure vanished, the golden trident flew back into Tang Wuling's glabella as a streak of golden light, and an indescribable sense of emotion welled up in Tang Wuling's heart. His father had told him that he would be able to save him on 3 occasions. Even though he was far, far away, caught up in the turbulence of space and time, he was doing everything in his power to protect Tang Wuling. Even though Tang Wuling had never actually met his birth father, tears were flowing down his face. He was able to clearly see just how much love his father had for him through those eyes that encompassed the entire world. Father, I'll definitely find you, he roared in his heart as the tears continued to flow. In the end, all of the golden halos vanished into Tang Wuling's body, and a soul ring appeared to join his other 8 soul rings. This was a purplish golden soul ring that was riddled with golden patterns, which were giving off a regal aura. The infernal lightning vine had already disappeared into Tang Wuling's body, and it had become as fond of him as a small child was of a parent figure. The infernal lightning vine had completed its 100,000-year evolution, and sealed within Tang Wuling's 9th soul ring was an enormous amount of pure lightning power that hadn't been completely absorbed earlier. This lightning power would continue to support the infernal lightning vine's future evolution, allowing it to develop countless times faster than normal soul spirits. As the lightning disappeared, the sky also gradually cleared. The dark clouds subsided, and the storm was finally about to be over after wreaking havoc for over 7 hours. The ocean became placid again, but the interconnected fleets were currently looking very much worse for wear. The protective barriers had almost been completely destroyed by the ferocious storm, and almost 2/3 of the 3 fleets' energy supplies had been depleted. On top of that, many of the soul tools on the smaller ships had been damaged. If Chen Zhenji hadn't reacted quickly enough and immediately commanded all of the ships to release their protective barriers to their fullest extent, that storm of lightning could have quite possibly destroyed the entire federal fleet. All of the supervisors on the ships were in complete awe, and even Chen Zhenji himself felt as if he had dodged a bullet. That storm of purplish golden lightning had most likely never been seen before in the entire history of the Douluo continent, and even a Godslayer missile couldn't match its destructive power. The total energy reserve of the 3 fleets combined could power a major city like Bright City for 20 years. Yet during the storm, many of the soul energy battery circuits had been damaged from overexertion. This was simply unimaginable. This level of destructive power had most likely never been seen before. Look, there's someone up there. An advisor suddenly yelled. Chen Zhenji immediately rushed over to the screen and focused his gaze on the 2 people hovering in midair depicted on the screen. One of them was standing while the other was seated, and they were situated at the epicenter of where the storm had been before. The one who was seated was a young man with purplish golden light radiating from his entire body, and his 9th purplish golden soul ring was extremely eye-catching. Standing beside him was none other than the man who had been detected by the sensory soul tools earlier. All of a sudden, Chen Zhenji's pupils contracted drastically as he identified the man seated in midair to be none other than the captain of the Blood Dragon Squad. Furthermore, through comparisons with photos supplied by the Federation, he was able to confirm that he was also the Tang sect master, Tang Wuling. How could it be him? Chen Zhenji's heart was filled with incredulity. No matter how he thought about it, he couldn't understand how Tang Wuling could possess such fearsome power, allowing him to draw upon the power of the sea. A series of loud buzzing rang out as all of the functioning soul tools on the federal fleet quickly locked onto Tang Wuling and Shi. Right at this moment, Tang Wuling opened his eyes, which were still glistening from his tears, but what was especially remarkable was that there was a purplish golden light shimmering within them. Under the scrutiny of the entire federal fleet, he waved a hand through the air, and an enormous wave was suddenly swept up over the ocean, which had already returned to a placid state. All of the soul tools instantly lost their target, and when the giant wave subsided, both Tang Wuling and Shi were already nowhere to be seen. The commanders of the 3 fleets were rooted to the spot upon seeing this. Who was that and why had he appeared in this place? Was he the one who had brought on that terrifying storm? Who was he? Chen Zhenji's expression had darkened significantly, and at the same time, thoughts were racing through his mind, allowing him to instantly form a string of conclusions. With the Douluo Empire's soul technology, it was virtually impossible that they would possess the power to alter the weather. However, that didn't mean that others would also be incapable of this. As the Battle God Hallmaster, he had always been aware of just how powerful the Tang sect was. If there were any organization that could contend with the Federal Institute of Soul Technology, then it could only be the Tang sect. Furthermore, this Blood Dragon Squad leader was also the Tang sect master. It had to be the Tang sect that was behind this. Chen Zhenji took a deep breath before issuing an order. Examine all of the equipment and tally up all of the losses that we incurred during the storm. At the same time, attempt to connect with the satellite system to ascertain our location. In the meantime, all 3 fleets are to remain in place and maintain interconnection. Chapter 1410. Deep within the sea, the anxious group of people on the submarine were finally able to welcome the return of their leader. When Yuan and Yui saw Shi and Tang Wuling return together through a special piece of equipment on the submarine, she immediately heaved a huge sigh of relief. Sect Master, did you discover any suitable explosion points? The submarine captain was also extremely relieved. It was already a completely inhuman feat to survive under the enormous water pressure in the deep sea. If it weren't for the stunning performance that Tang Wuling had displayed during the trial of 5 gods, he wouldn't have dared to allow Tang Wuling to take this risk. There's no need for that. Everything's already been taken care of. We've already bought more than enough time for the Douluo Empire. Shi replied with a wide smile. What happened? The captain was rather taken aback to hear this. Tang Wuling replied, it's a long story. Let's continue back to the Federation. If the Douluo Empire still can't defend itself even after this, then we won't be able to do anything, either. Let's leave this area first, then rise to the surface, and when the Holy Spirit Douluo returns, we'll set off right away. After issuing that sequence of instructions, Tang Wuling's body swayed slightly, and Yue Hengyu hurriedly stepped forward to lend Tang Wuling his support. Are you alright, Captain? A wry smile appeared on Tang Wuling's face. I'm fine. I'm just a little exhausted and require some rest. Shu Lizzie immediately produced a few recovery pork buns for Tang Wuling to consume, and his condition improved slightly before he was helped back to his cabin by Yue Hengyu. Thus, everyone immediately turned to Shi, and Yuan and Yui couldn't help but ask, what happened? Shi's eyes were currently glowing with excitement and exhilaration. You probably wouldn't believe me even if I told you what happened. Boss was like the true sea god out there. Even now, my heart is still thumping like crazy. Hurry up and tell us. Yuan and Yui grabbed onto one of his ears and gave it a slight twist. I'll talk. Please have mercy, my esteemed wife. At the Douluo Empire's main frontline control center, Dai Tianling was wearing a military uniform with a pair of special epaulets that were emblazoned, the image of a tiger's head. The entire control center was in an extremely busy and hectic state. This frontline control center had actually already been established half a year ago. This was something that concerned the fate of the entire empire, so preparations had naturally been made well in advance. It was exactly because these preparations had been made that Dai Tianling had always thought that the empire was well equipped to face the oncoming federal fleet. Only after Tang Wuling's arrival was he truly made aware of just how massive the gap between the Douluo Empire and the Douluo Federation was. This gap was far wider than he had imagined, almost to the point where it was impossible to bridge. Thankfully, they had the weapons supplied by the Tang sect to even out the playing field a little, but never did he think that the federal fleet would arrive so quickly. If it hadn't been for the Holy Spirit Douluo, he would have still been completely in the dark. According to our super long-distance radars, the Federal fleet has veered off its original course. They most likely got caught up in an unprecedentedly ferocious storm, and they're currently temporarily docked 600 nautical miles away from the shoreline, displaying no signs of continuing onward. From our radar surveillance, we can see that all of their ships seem to have become interconnected to form a man-made island. Keep up the surveillance, Dai Tianling said in a solemn voice. As the Emperor, he had to oversee the proceedings from the front lines in person. This first battle was undoubtedly going to be the most important one, and they had to keep the Federal fleet from landing at all costs. Otherwise, if they were to establish bridge towers, they would definitely be able to gain a firm foothold with the Federation's technology. If that were to happen, then the Federal fleet would be able to deliver more weapons and soldiers to the Douluo Empire, and that would be the beginning of the end. As such, their strategy was to keep the Federal fleet away from the shoreline and prevent them from landing at all costs. Father, it looks like the Federal fleet was severely damaged during that storm. Should we launch an attack on them to assess their current condition? Dai Yuyan asked. Dai Tianling waved a hand in response. Our navy is far inferior in power to the Federal fleet. Even though they were caught up in that storm, they haven't allowed any chaos to set in, and this strategy where they're connecting all of their ships is enough to minimize the damage. Just proceed according to the original plan. How are the preparations going on your end? Dai Yuyan replied. The initial stages will be complete in about 2 more days. It's a good thing we prepared early, so we should be able to make it in time. Dai Tianling turned to him with a serious expression. Should isn't good enough, you have to make sure everything's ready on time. Otherwise, it'll spell disaster for our entire empire. Do you understand? Not only was he the emperor, back in his youth, he had joined the military under a false identity, working his way up from an ordinary soldier to a general over a span of 17 years. He had climbed up the ranks step by step and forged a dazzling military regime for himself. After he revealed his identity and returned to the imperial family, he immediately received the support of the military, thereby allowing him to seize the throne and become the emperor. As such, in terms of military prowess, it could be said that he was one of a handful of the most exceptional emperors in Douluo Empire history, and this was why he was acting as the commander-in-chief in this frontline control center. The current high-ranking officials of the military were once his colleagues and even his subordinates. Ever since Dai Tianling's inauguration, he had ironed out many major flaws in the military and strongly promoted development in the fields of military affairs, technology, education, soulmaster development, and battle armor development. This had allowed the Douluo Empire to undergo an enormous transformation, and during the past few decades, the empire had been developing far faster than the Federation. It was just that the gap between them was too massive in the first place, so they were still yet to catch up. The Douluo Empire's development had naturally caught the attention of the Federation, and that was one of the important reasons behind the Eagle faction's push to instigate this war. According to them, if the Douluo Empire were to continue developing at this rate, it would eventually pose a threat to the Federation someday. Furthermore, the quicker the Douluo Empire developed, the faster it was going to deplete its resources. The technology between the Federation and the Empire couldn't be shared, so the Empire would have to expend resources to walk the same path as the Federation once already had, thereby resulting in an enormous waste. It was none other than these reasons that finally pressured the Federal Parliament into approving of this war in the end. The Federal fleet's mission on this occasion was very simple: destroy the Imperial military and seize or destroy the Imperial family. At the same time, they had to keep the slaughter of the general public to a minimum and seize resources to prepare for the Federation's future plans of space exploration. Yes, Father, Dai Yuyan said in a solemn voice. Father, this storm was very bizarre. Our meteorology department didn't foresee it at all, and it arrived in an extremely abrupt manner. According to the analysis of our meteorology department, the storm doesn't seem to have been a naturally forming one. On top of that, the Federal fleet just so happened to have been situated right at the center of the storm. Otherwise, they would have already arrived at our empire by now. Isn't all of this very suspicious? Dai Tianling nodded in response. Indeed, it is. This storm has helped us immensely, and if it really was artificially created, then there's only one possibility. Thanks so much for watching this video. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Also leave a comment down below with suggestions on what novels to read.